Have you ever stopped to ask why the person who claims they need nobody is the same person who cannot stop thinking about the one who finally made them feel known? Why is it that the most emotionally withdrawn people, the ones who go quiet, pull back, and appear completely unbothered, end up forming the deepest bonds with very particular kinds of people? On the surface, it makes no sense. Withdrawal looks powerful, self-reliant, unreachable. They say they treasure their solitude. They say too much emotion exhausts them. They say they want nothing to do with complications. And they genuinely believe that. But here is what almost nobody ever sees. Beneath that composed exterior, beneath that measured tone, beneath that everything is fine posture, there is a nervous system that absorbed one defining lesson very early on. Getting close is risky, not because love itself is harmful, but because love once felt chaotic, inconsistent, and threatening. Maybe their emotions were dismissed. Maybe opening up led to consequences. Maybe they were forced to mature before they were ready. Maybe they discovered that relying on another person ends in pain. So they adjusted. They became self-reliant. They became rational. They became emotionally guarded. They constructed barriers, not thin ones, solid ones, invisible ones. And those barriers served their purpose. They shielded them from being hurt. They shielded them from instability. They shielded them from being overwhelmed. But here is what the study of human behavior reveals. When a child buries a need, that need does not vanish. It retreats inward. It waits. Avoidant people are not individuals without desire. They are individuals who have conditioned themselves not to reveal it. Deep down, underneath all the self-sufficiency and emotional distance, there still lives a very human longing. Not a longing for validation, not a longing for dominance, but a longing for something far more essential, safety that asks nothing of them, closeness that does not swallow them, love that does not erase who they are. And this is the turning point, because even the most guarded heart still wants to be recognized. It simply wants to be recognized without force. They do not want someone who requires constant emotional proof. They do not want someone who schedules emotional conversations daily. They do not want a connection that arrives like a flood. Their internal system is already exhausted. What they want is stillness. They want someone who does not crowd their space, but also does not vanish from it. Someone who is comfortable in silence without becoming anxious. Someone who can share feelings without making it an accusation. Someone who does not pursue relentlessly, but also does not disappear quietly. And when they cross paths with someone like that, something shifts inside them without warning. Their body eases. For perhaps the first time in memory, they do not feel the need to brace themselves. For perhaps the first time, proximity does not feel like a threat. It feels quiet, and quiet is uncommon. When your entire life has been spent guarding yourself from emotional overwhelm, quiet feels like air. It feels like finally setting down a weight you forgot you were carrying. This is the silent longing avoidants never voice. They want connection, but only the kind that does not destabilize them. They want love, but only the kind that does not claim their independence. They want closeness, but only the kind that does not ask them to disappear into someone else. And here is the significant shift. The moment an avoidant experiences emotional safety without expectation, something activates in their mind. The same mind that once repeated, "Keep your distance," now quietly wonders, perhaps this is something different. That quiet wonder is significant. Because for someone who spent years persuading themselves they are complete alone, discovering they can feel at ease with another person is genuinely disorienting. It shakes something fundamental, and what is fundamental feels precious. Human psychology demonstrates that people defend their sense of self more fiercely than they defend their own contentment. Avoidance constructed an identity built on self-sufficiency. I handle things alone. I do not form attachments easily. I function better without entanglement. But when they encounter someone who makes connection feel unthreatening, that identity begins to fracture, and fractures let something through. This is the reason they become more deeply involved than anyone anticipates. Not because something is wrong with them. Not because they have lost their footing, but because they are finally tasting connection without the cost of self-loss. And when something addresses a wound that has gone untreated for years, you do not simply appreciate it. You hold it, you carry it quietly. You return to it in your thoughts more than you acknowledge. You replay exchanges in your mind. You notice the gap when it is no longer present. That is not dependency. That is a nervous system identifying something it recognizes as safe. If you can understand this, you understand something that escapes most people entirely. Avoidants are not cold. They are hypervigilant. They are not without feeling. They are overwhelmed by feelings accumulated from before. And when they find someone whose presence lowers their guard instead of raising it, that person becomes rare. And what is rare becomes meaningful. Now here is what matters. If you stay through the end of this video, you will understand precisely what kind of presence and communication creates that feeling of safety, why it becomes something they return to repeatedly, and how this understanding can either deepen a genuine connection or unravel one entirely. Because once you grasp the psychology underneath this pattern, you do not view relationships the same way. You see people with different eyes, and different eyes lead to different choices, and different choices lead to different outcomes. Now consider this. If someone has spent years shielding their interior world, what kind of presence would slowly invite them to unlock that door? Not one that is forceful, not one that is needy, not one that is theatrical, a grounded one. Having understood the hidden longing inside an avoidant, the next element becomes obvious. It is not passionate urgency that draws them forward. It is emotional consistency. It is the experience of someone who does not rush the process, test their responses, or flood their senses. Avoidant personalities are acutely sensitive to pressure of any kind. The instant they detect expectation, their body responds before conscious thought does. Something tightens internally. Their attention drifts. Their instinct moves toward creating separation. This response is not aimed at anyone. It is self-preservation. Their system learned early that excessive emotional intensity means losing agency, and agency, to them, is the foundation of safety. So when they meet someone who expresses themselves in a grounded, measured way, something unusual occurs. Their defenses do not rise. Their system does not gear up for impact. It does not scan for a way out. It settles, and settling is powerful. The people who leave the deepest impression on avoidance tend to share recognizable qualities. They communicate with clarity. They express how they feel without assigning fault. They hear without overriding. They honor silence. They do not demand immediate responses. They allow breathing room without transforming it into rejection. This way of communicating carries an implicit message. You are not confined here. Freedom draws someone who fears entrapment. When there is no pursuit, no emotional outbursts, no constant monitoring, the avoidant mind begins to decompress. They stop preparing for threat. They stop plotting their exit. They become capable of being present. And presence constructs connection. Psychology addresses this through the concept of co-regulation. When two individuals interact, their physiological states influence one another. If one person carries anxiety, the other will often absorb that tension. But when one person is emotionally regulated, patient, and composed, that groundedness can settle the other. Avoidants respond powerfully to that kind of regulation. It resembles sitting beside still water after living through extended turbulence. They may not speak it aloud. They may maintain their composed appearance, but internally, something realigns. They begin linking that person to ease, to mental clarity, to relief. Relief becomes something they return to, not dramatically, subtly. They begin anticipating their exchanges. They find comfort in the predictable tone. They observe how disagreements do not escalate. They recognize they are not being required to perform. For someone accustomed to safeguarding their emotional autonomy, this is revelatory. And here's the central point. The grounded communicator does not attempt to repair them, does not study them like a subject, does not demand entry to every private corner of their mind. They simply remain present and reliable. What they say aligns with what they do. Their reactions remain proportionate. Reliability builds trust. Trust dismantles barriers. Barriers fall incrementally, not in a single dramatic moment, not through one honest declaration, but through small accumulations. A message that goes slightly longer, a response that goes slightly deeper, a shared recollection, a moment of quiet honesty. These small movements are meaningful because avoidants do not commit in a single leap. They edge forward gradually, and every forward edge that meets no punishment allows the brain to gradually recalibrate. It begins to learn that closeness is not inevitably followed by pain. That shift is significant, but here is where the bond grows even more substantial. The grounded communicator does not interpret distance as rejection. When an avoidant withdraws to restore themselves, they do not respond with frustration. They do not make accusations. They do not threaten absence. They remain stable. This stability delivers a second message of great weight. Your need for space does not threaten me. That message creates emotional safety at a depth most relationships never access. When someone experiences acceptance without pursuit, without judgment, without ultimatum, they begin to bond in a way that feels organic rather than manufactured. It is not about elaborate romantic gestures. It is about emotional atmosphere. Avoidants become genuinely attached to those who build an atmosphere where they can exist without contraction. And once they associate a person with that kind of room, the connection grows roots. They may continue to value solitude. They may still need intervals of aloneness. But now, their solitude includes a presence that does not threaten it. That is genuinely significant, because rather than feeling forced to choose between closeness and autonomy, they begin to experience both simultaneously. And when a relationship stops demanding that they sacrifice their core nature, their defenses begin to soften. They begin reaching out first. They begin sharing more. They become quietly protective of what has formed, all because of communication that does not alarm them. This is not strategy or manipulation. It is emotional attunement meeting emotional caution. And when those two find each other, something uncommon takes shape. The avoidant no longer experiences connection as self-erasure. They experience it as expansion. They are not being chased. They are being received. They are not being cornered. They are being honored. And being honored to them is the closest thing to being loved. This is why certain presences stay with them long after they leave. Not because they were louder, not because they were more consuming, but because they were steady. In a world saturated with emotional turbulence, steadiness is striking. And when someone who fears losing their footing finds a connection that does not destabilize them, attachment forms on its own, quietly, deeply, durably. That is how the pull begins, not through chaos, through calm. And this is where the terrain shifts, because what begins as comfort can quietly intensify into something far more consuming. When a person who has guarded their inner world for years finally encounters someone whose presence feels balanced and non-threatening, their system does something unanticipated. It bonds, not through sudden intensity, not through infatuation born in a single moment, but through relief. Through the removal of threat, through the quiet experience of feeling emotionally leveled. That leveled feeling becomes indispensable. The human brain is built to repeat what reduces internal noise. When tension lifts, the body registers it as reward. Neurochemicals tied to bonding and comfort are released. The mind takes inventory. It records the source. It remembers who was present when the noise inside went still. For someone who rarely experiences that internal stillness, this effect carries real weight. But here is the psychological dimension that surprises most people. Avoidants do not form attachments through intensity. They form them through contrast. If previous relationships were defined by pressure, emotional extremes, or relentless expectation, then a composed connection registers as radically different. The difference creates an impression. The impression creates a memory. The memory creates attachment. Now imagine a shift occurs. Imagine the grounded communicator becomes less predictable, not intentionally hurtful, simply less consistent. Replies slow down, signals blur. There is a quiet pulling back. The tone changes in small ways. The certainty that once existed fades at the edges. For most people, this generates mild uncertainty. For an avoidant, it can activate something far older. The same nervous system that had finally settled now senses instability. The calm they had come to associate with this person feels at risk. And when safety feels unstable, the brain does not remain passive. It sharpens. This is the point at which attachment can convert into preoccupation. Psychology identifies this as intermittent reinforcement. When something rewarding occurs unpredictably, the brain increases its effort to recover it. Attention narrows. Interactions are reviewed. Patterns are sought. The mind works to reestablish what once felt like equilibrium. The avoidant who once prized distance may find themselves now preoccupied with the person who disrupted their internal order. Why? Because from the beginning it was never truly about romance in the conventional sense. It was about internal regulation. They were not drawn to compliments or persistent attention. They were attached to the internal state that person made accessible. The mental quiet, the emotional balance, the experience of being connected without surrendering control. When that state becomes unreliable, the mind attempts to restore it. They may say nothing outwardly. They may not pursue in visible ways. But inside, cognitive activity increases. Wondering begins. What shifted? Was it something I did? How do I return this to what it was? This internal friction is uncomfortable. And discomfort, for humans, demands resolution. So the avoidant who once moved toward distance may now find themselves leaning in more than anticipated. They might initiate contact. They might reach for reassurance in indirect ways. They might pay closer attention to every response. Not because they have become emotionally dependent overnight, but because their brain is attempting to recover a feeling it once knew. This is the dynamic that surprises people. It is not fixation on a person's qualities or presence in the obvious sense. It is fixation on a lost internal state. The grounded communicator, without conscious design, became linked to equilibrium. When that equilibrium disappears, the avoidant does not only miss who they were with, they miss who they were when they were around them. And one more layer exists beneath this. Avoidants often ground their sense of self in being emotionally self-contained. They operate from the belief that they do not require others for stability. So when they realize that another person shaped their internal world to such a degree, it unsettles that belief. That unsettling generates even more mental focus. The mind pursues control. It examines every detail. It wants to understand how the dynamic shifted. This examination can become consuming. It is important to see this clearly. The preoccupation does not come from weakness. It comes from contrast and conditioning. When peace is infrequent, its absence is deafening. When stability is newly discovered, its loss feels disorienting. And because avoidants typically do not process these internal waves openly, the experience can feel particularly intense. They may present calm on the outside while restless on the inside. They may appear removed while feeling off balance within. The gap between their outer composure and inner turbulence deepens the mental loop. The more unpredictable the dynamic, the more persistent the loop becomes. Uncertainty stimulates the brain's pursuit systems in ways that certainty cannot. It sustains focus. It generates anticipation. It fuels mental reconstruction. It deepens emotional investment. This is how a grounded connection can evolve into a psychological attachment that resembles something close to craving. Not through drama, through inconsistency arriving after stability. And this illuminates something widely misread about avoidance. They do not become deeply attached because someone pursued them relentlessly. They become deeply focused when someone first offered them safety and then withdrew without warning. The mind seeks resolution. It wants the original order restored, and while it searches, it remains locked. This cycle can move in one of two directions. Without awareness, the avoidant may remain suspended in confusion, chasing a feeling rather than building something real. But with awareness, something powerful becomes possible. They can begin to recognize that what they are actually searching for is not someone else's consistency. It is their own. It is internal steadiness. It is the capacity to feel balanced from within rather than through another person. And when that recognition arrives, genuine development begins. Because the real transformation is understanding that security cannot be built on someone else's unpredictability. Real strength is learning to generate internal calm rather than locating it outside yourself. And that understanding reshapes everything. Now the full picture becomes visible. What appeared to be emotional detachment was never a deficit of depth. What appeared to be indifference was never the absence of feeling. It was protection. It was adaptation. It was survival, shaped by what came before. And once you see it that way, the real work begins. If you recognize yourself in this, receive this truth with your full strength intact. You are not longing for a person, you are longing for inner stability. You are reaching for a bond that does not threaten your sense of self. You want closeness that does not feel like dissolution. There is nothing disordered about that. Every person wants connection without the cost of identity. The distinction is that avoidants learn to guard identity without exception. Independence became their outer layer. Emotional control became their instrument. Distance became their method. But layers are exhausting. Instruments block not only threat but also warmth. Maturity begins the moment you understand that security does not require holding everyone at arm's length. Genuine security is built from within. When you develop the capacity to manage your own emotional responses, you are no longer at the mercy of someone else's behavior to feel grounded. That is real development. When you can remain with discomfort instead of retreating from it, when you can name what you need without fearing entrapment, when you can receive closeness without your system sounding an alarm, you step into a version of yourself that is genuinely freer. And freedom is not about keeping others out. It is about no longer needing to. If you are someone who naturally communicates with steadiness and clarity, recognize what you carry, your regulated presence has a quiet and substantial effect. Your ability to remain grounded influences the emotional atmosphere around you, but that influence comes with a responsibility worth holding. Do not use emotional consistency as a mechanism to generate need in others. Do not extend warmth only to retract it. Do not treat unpredictability as an instrument. Genuine strength is not demonstrated by how completely someone attaches to you. It is demonstrated by how safely they are able to develop beside you. Healthy connection is not constructed by creating hunger. It is built by cultivating trust. It is built on the understanding that closeness and autonomy are not in opposition. When two people bring genuine self-awareness into a relationship, something lasting becomes possible. One person learns that intimacy does not consume identity. The other learns that reliability is not a form of control. Both expand, and expansion is what this has always been about. Attachment patterns are not permanent verdicts. They are learned responses to lived experience. Learned responses can be unlearned. Minds can recalibrate. Emotional reactions can shift. But shifting requires something real from you. It requires looking directly at the fear of losing control. It requires acknowledging that self-sufficiency alone does not produce a full life. It requires moving into vulnerability without reframing it as failure. Vulnerability is not defeat. It is honesty made visible. It is choosing to be known over choosing to be protected. It is allowing your full self to exist in proximity to another without retreating behind distance. When you choose that direction, everything in your relationships changes. Rather than pursuing the return of a feeling, you begin building something that generates its own.